As you're coming in, drop in the chat where you're coming from. Always like to see and hear. I did have someone in between the sessions, Jeannie, that said, talk about living overseas, and it's 8 p.m. their time, and they couldn't make it, but it will be recorded. So I did tell them that. So awesome to have folks not just in the U.S. and Canada, but really at this point across the world. So welcome everyone. So some Boston, hey Allison, Wake Forest, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Jersey, Miami. So I'm heading right after, literally, we hang up this meeting and I'm off to Vegas for the Customer Connect Expo over the next couple of days. And I know JP's going to be with me and maybe a few other of you guys will be there as well. So excited to have that as well coming up. It's a busy time. It's the spring conference season, so
Sure
keeps a
is.
lot of us busy. I know Jeannie can attest to that as well. Um, but today we get the chance to we're going to talk about how to get executive buy-in, and in customer experience, really in business. It's not just CX. In customer experience, one of the biggest challenges a lot of us have is, really getting the executives to buy in and fund what we need done. So I'm super excited about this, but I'm even more excited about bringing my friend in, Jeannie Walters, as our guest speaker today. Jeannie is a CCXP, a CSP, which most of you probably know CCXP, but CSP is Certified Speaking Professional, which is really big in our world. Award-winning customer experience expert, international keynote speaker, founder of Experience Investigators. And by the way, Jeannie, I've never really told you that. I love the name.
Thank you.
So it's awesome to have you here. But Jeannie, welcome. I'm so excited to hear what you've got to share with us today. And I'll let you just jump right in.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you, everybody. And you can probably tell by my voice, I have a little bit of a cold. So forgive me if I need to mute and sneeze or something. If I do, that's me, not you. But I have a couple slides to share today. But as we go through this, please feel free to drop things into the chat, drop things in, or raise your hand even. And Sean, if you can help me kind of keep track of those, that would be great. Feel free to
Will do.
interrupt and let me know if we need to go through something a little bit differently. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeannie Walters. I have been in this space for a while, more than 20 plus years, and started this business, Experience Investigators, 15 years ago. And one of the things that we kept running into when working with clients, because our focus is really on strategy. And so we sit kind of above those tech decisions and all of that. And one of the things we kept running into was seeing customer experience kind of labeled incorrectly at organizations. And what I mean by that was there were folks who were like in charge of what they called, well, I'm in charge of the NPS group. And NPS, we all know, Net Promoter Score, all those customer feedback metrics are just that. They're measurements, they're not outcomes. So we went through this whole phase in CX where people were treating those feedback metrics as if those were the outcomes. But those are not business outcomes. So after a while, people would look around and say, well, why are we doing this? We're spending all this money to send surveys and to do all these things. And we're not seeing the changes because there wasn't a real strategy in place. There wasn't something that really helped leaders understand that, let's not shoot the messenger because that happens a lot in CX too, where people say, well, I keep telling you what's wrong, but we don't have the resources to fix it. We don't have the influence or authority or accountability to fix what's broken. Or maybe there isn't a lot big broken right now, but we can see the future. We know we have to innovate and we're not investing where we need to. If we don't position this in the right ways, it's really hard to get that executive buy-in. So when we work with leaders throughout the world, we talk to them about, okay, what is your goal? And I am constantly amazed, and I'm going to be very honest with this group, at how bad the goals are at most organizations. They are terrible. They don't mean anything, or they don't even have them. They say things like, well, we're going to deliver the best customer experience possible to every single customer that we have. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? But how do we measure that? How do we know we're successful? So when we look at this macro data, we see why this is important. And everybody here, we're all invested in this. We all understand it. So companies that prioritize CX see 1.7 times higher customer retention rates. That sounds so obvious to us. Of course, the more you retain, the more revenue your organization gets. But when we're talking about it at a macro level and we're not bringing it down to what it actually means for our organization, it's very easy for people to say, well, I'm not seeing that here. I don't understand that here. When we say things like customer centric companies are 60% more profitable than companies that don't focus on customers, again, sounds great. But if we're not bringing that down to what that means at our organization, if we're not helping our leaders see the future, they're not going to buy into this. Because what tends to happen is customer experience gets treated like something really fun to talk about. I've heard things like leaders say, you know what? We all know what a great customer experience is. We just have to do it. Well, how do you know everybody knows that? How have you defined it? We would never say to a sales team, go do sales and give them no goals. But that happens to customer experience teams all the time. So we have to become business strategists. So we know 86% of buyers say customer experiences increase their willingness to pay more. This is something they say, but humans are really tricky. We say one thing and we behave totally differently. This happens all the time. So we have to make sure that when we're building a business case, we're not just looking at feedback. We're looking at operational metrics. We're looking at behavioral data. We're really putting together the full picture of what is happening for our organization. We know that proactive service results in a full point increase in net promoter score. But what does that mean to our leaders? I went into one client and he was so proud of their dashboard. He was like really proud that they got their dashboard on the big screen in the lobby of this corporate office. And he was like, "Look at the dashboard. Isn't it amazing?" And it had all the colors and the pie charts. And I said, "Well, okay, so I see NPS here, but I don't see the word customer anywhere on this. How are people supposed to know the context of this? What does this really mean?" So the way I think about CX leadership, we have to be storytellers. We have to socialize. We have to make sure that we're bringing context to everything that we talk about. Because nobody here or in the businesses that we are part of, they did not say to their kindergarten teacher, I want to be a customer experience professional, right? This is not something that's been around that long. This is not something that is integrated into most organizations, especially those with legacy, especially those historically big matrixed organizations. This is something that has been kind of an evolution, and we have to keep guiding that. So when we talk about strategy, this is where we get into goals. Strategy is essentially a plan of action. It comes from the Latin, it comes from warfare, it comes from this idea of when you go into battle, you can either go in and just everybody on their own try to win, or you can have an actual strategy. You can say, this is what we will do as an organization to get the results that we're planning on. That's what this is about. So we have to tie everything together. So sometimes I ask, what is the strategy here at this organization? And I've had leaders say, we're going to put our customers first. That's what we're about. We're going to be customer centric. And I'll say, great, what does that mean? And I had one very confident executive go up to a whiteboard and draw this. And of course, everybody gets this idea, but we have to translate this into real business outcomes. So first, we need a universal CX language. We need to define what success means in real terms. So we use something called a success statement where we break this down. But what we essentially want to identify in this definition is what specific outcomes will be most meaningful. Most meaningful is different from one organization to another. You have to make sure that you are speaking the language of your leaders. We have to connect how those specific outcomes will tie back to our larger organizational goals and leadership goals. We want to understand how are we measuring success, and we want the realistic parameters to be defined. Because it's great to think that we could do everything for everyone, but we can't unless your organization Hang on. There we go. Is that better? Every once in a while, I hit a chord on my microphone and I have to learn how to stop talking with my hands. So, as we go through this, I encourage you to think about your own organization or the clients that you serve and think about, do you know the answers to these questions? The reason is because often I will work with leaders who don't know the answers, and that's okay. But what that tells you is it's time to, forgive me, investigate, just like experienced investigators. So we have to find out sometimes what are the goals of our leaders? What are the organizational goals? Because they aren't well defined, they aren't well communicated. So we have to really carry the banner and say everybody has to understand these in order for us to be successful. So there are 5 steps to a success statement. One is understanding your organizational goals. What's your overall vision and top goals for your organization? This is about what are the KPIs that they care about. When your CEO stands up there at a town hall and says, "This is what we're doing for the next 3 years," do you really know what those are? Do you know how to measure those? We have to start there in order to deliver value for our organization. Then we want to look at our specific leaders. And we didn't always include this, but since we started including this in this process, it makes a big difference. That's because you can talk about these big goals of your organization, and your chief marketing officer is going to think about those differently than your chief financial officer. We have to bridge all those leaders. We have to tie all of that together and make sure that we are speaking the language of our leaders. So if you have a specific leader as a sponsor, an executive sponsor for what you're doing, it's really important to know, what do they personally care about? What will help them feel like they're winning? So chief marketing officers, they might not care so much about retention. But if we talk to them about, you know what happens when we get more word of mouth referrals, that makes marketing a lot easier. When we talk to them about the word of mouth kind of credibility out there with user reviews and social media and things like that, that's what they care about. So we have to really understand, what will we measure that's important to them. Your chief financial officer is going to think differently. And so you want to make sure that you are talking about exactly what they care about. Every organization in the world, every single one, has 2 goals: increase revenue, decrease expenses. Everything else fits under there somehow because that's about profitability. Some of you will say, "Oh, we're a nonprofit." You still have those goals. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits. We still want more revenue. We still want fewer expenses so that we can be as efficient as possible and deliver the most value for the people that we serve. So, when you are thinking about, how do I present something to my CFO, think about, what are the levers we have in customer experience to improve revenue or decrease expenses. So that's things like, can we lower the cost of service? Can we look at ways to increase retention? What would happen? Let's brainstorm. What would happen if we could increase retention by 1%? Sometimes that means millions of dollars in organizations. So once you start extrapolating this out and getting real about the business, people start taking this a lot more seriously. And then we want to look for those related specific outcomes. So we want to ask, where's the overlap between all of this? Sometimes people come to me and they say, well, we're working on trying to improve or trying to reduce friction in our customer journey. And I'll say, that's great. So show me the points of friction and what are you working on and how are you prioritizing? And they're like, well, we're just trying to do everything. We've got a whole list. We've got all these things that we want to fix. But this is where this can help you prioritize, because if you know your organizational goals and you know your leadership goals, then you can really look for the places where, hey, if we converted more in this part of the journey, that would mean XYZ for our organization. This is where you start putting the puzzle together to make sure that the levers you're pulling, the effort you're putting in, and the requests for funding and for support that you're asking for are related to those outcomes. So this is
A
yeah.
question came in, and actually, it's really good segue before we move to the next section, and maybe even here. But how do you deal with reluctance of the C-suite or VPs, et cetera, to share their goals,
Hmm.
with you within the CX, program.
Um, wow, that would be, I think that's a bigger challenge. That's a cultural question because that they should be sharing organizational goals. Everybody should know those, right? But I think what I've seen, two things work. One is people are always interested in being seen as guides, as advisors, things like that. So reaching out and saying, "Hey, I need your help on this. I need your help to be successful." Sometimes that can be a good way to approach it. The other thing that people love to talk about customer experience. I mean, we've all found this, right? Like people think that it's really cool and fun, and they have no idea how much work goes into it, but they think it's really fun. And that's because we've all been customers. So if you go to them and say, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your definition of success of customer experience, you can start there and then weave in, okay, in order to be successful, we should tie this back with our organizational outcomes. What are the most important outcomes that you think are related to this? So, but there, what I see at the very, very large organizations is that they don't have like their 2025 goals until April, right? Like they're just slow on getting them out to everybody. And then some of the smaller organizations have very ill-defined goals. So what I like to say is start wherever you can start. So sometimes that means instead of going right to your C-suite, start with your leader and say, let's work on this together. What are our most important goals here? What are we judged on? If we do something by the end of the year, what will everybody go, "Oh my gosh, that was a home run. We really did well." So if you don't have KPIs or OKRs or all those other ways that we call these things, then think about what does your CEO talk about? We had one that it was a law firm and the CEO kept saying, "I don't want to be," and I won't use the language that he used, but he basically said, "I don't want to be another jerky law firm." That was kind of his message. So we were able to create feedback where we were really watching for, are these lawyers being humble and are they showing up in the right way? And does that lead to more work? Does that lead to more referrals? And it absolutely did. So even though they didn't have a really clear goal, we were able to take the words of the people at the top and say, what do they really care about? And how can we make sure that we're delivering for that? So this is about both like love and logic. We have to use creativity, we have to use strategy, we have to really be kind of both sides of our brains in customer experience work because otherwise it can come across as too fluffy or it can come across as kind of rigid around the wrong things. That's what I think happens when people become so obsessed with we just have to get NPS up. That's our whole goal. NPS is not an outcome, it's a metric. So we have to really be creative about understanding how this all fits together. And that leads right into this. So we have to choose what metrics to measure. And this is where I always think about this as a Venn diagram. There are feedback metrics that are very important. So we want those feedback loops. Net Promoter Score can be an incredibly important metric, as well as CSAT and customer effort score and all of those. Transactional versus relational, all of that is really important. Then we have the behavioral analytics. How are people actually behaving? What does it tell us when they abandon the website where they do? What does it tell us when they won't, get back to a salesperson? What does it tell us? So we have to look at behavior. And then we also want to look at operational metrics. What's happening with retention? What's happening with churn? What's happening with, share of wallet? All of those things because that gives us information. Those are signals. And now with AI, there are so many ways that we can really quickly assess and evaluate these patterns and lean into seeing a pattern and saying, oh my gosh, I think this is something that we should look into in the customer journey. And if we stop it from getting worse, that could be a cost savings. So that's how you start. You start framing the projects that you want to do. And then we also want to define success based on reality. So I I like to put this in because sometimes people say, yeah, we're going to get, a zillion more customers and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. But customer experience leaders, you all know this, sometimes don't have accountability or authority to actually make the changes we need. So we rely completely on influence. That is a limitation, and we have to embrace that. We have to just accept that. So if you know, like I see this all the time with politics, we know that, like, oh my gosh, there's a huge problem with the digital channel. Our customers keep telling us, we know it's a problem. We know if we fixed it, all these good things would happen. But every time we go to them, they say, we've got our roadmap. That's for the next 3 years. We're not getting to that yet because they have no skin in the game. They're not being held accountable towards these outcomes. So by being realistic about that, then we start putting guardrails up about our priorities. And then you can say, these are the organizational outcomes that we're working on. These are the ways that we're working with our leaders and delivering for them. These are the levers we can pull. This is what we're doing, and this is how we're measuring success. If you're asking me to do something outside of this, help me understand where that fits into these priorities. This is also what helps us avoid the what I sometimes call CX by urgency, right? Because if that complaint goes up to the C-suite, that becomes the most immediate urgent thing to fix, even though it might not be. So when we have a real strategy, when we have real outcomes defined and do a good job of defining success, we protect ourselves from that stuff. So this is just an example, but they never look exactly like this. Everybody's different, but it really is about how do you break this down? You want specific outcomes, relevant organizational goals, relevant leadership goals, and metrics. So this is a way to have a tangible, actionable document that helps protect you, put up guardrails, but it also is a way to come back to, you know, on those overwhelming days when it feels like everything's a priority, coming back to what will help us lead to these outcomes. Where should I put my time and energy? That is really the importance. And then we also want to build a business case that speaks CFO. We want CX to solve expensive problems, high churn, rework, long resolution times, low first contact resolution. All of those are expensive. So we want to make sure that we are talking in a way that helps leaders understand that's what this is. So what I want everybody here to do is communicate as a leader because I see too many CX leaders walk in and communicate as a passive messenger. And we are really part of a winning business strategy if we show up that way, if we have the right information, if we can communicate that way. And then we want to blend all of this data with real customer feedback, with real customer stories, because I have been in rooms full of executives. They have seen chart after chart after chart, and they do not care. And then you play that recording from the contact center, and suddenly it becomes a top priority. We are moved as humans by stories. So every single report, every time we show up, we have to have some stories. We have to weave that in. And so look for stories in your customer journey maps, your organic feedback, customer testimonials, customer calls, video recordings, etc. And then one little bonus here is once you collect all those stories, an annual wrap up to show the progress, people really get moved by that. So you can show numbers all day long. People understand numbers, but they're removed from humanity. What we have to do is bring our leaders back to humanity again and again. This is a great way to do that. If you want this template, I have it for you. You can get it here. You can also get it here where if you give me a little feedback, but I have a cold today, so be nice. So, but at this point, I'd love to take questions or discussion or.
Awesome. Well, Jeannie, thank you so much. This is great. And looking at the list of five, you're spot on. The organizational goals, the leadership goals, looking for related outcomes or specific outcomes, choosing the metrics to measure and define success based on reality. I mean, those are all the keys in how the executives think. But almost more than the five steps, what I really love is your focus at the end there on stories. Because I talk a lot about that. I know myself about
Mhm.
being able to tell stories, because again, we're humans and that's how for millennia, that's how we communicated.
That's
So when
right.
you think about that storytelling, why is that so difficult for a lot of folks? Because I know it can be kind of difficult as we get caught up in
Mhm.
strategic bullet points or like you said, dashboards or graphs and things like that, but it's the exact opposite, right?
It is. And I think this really hit me when I went into an executive, leadership meeting, and I was showing them kind of flows of all these different things. And they were getting it and they were engaged. But then I literally played a recording and they were so embarrassed because they realized that everything we were telling them was true and they were letting it happen. And I think sometimes what we have to remember is we as humans make decisions based on our emotions and then we rationalize it with logic. So whenever we talk about data-driven decisions, I'm always like, yeah, okay, because really it's like when you're one of my favorite examples. Is anyone a fan of those house hunter shows like International House Hunters? And
Yeah.
yeah, they're great. They're fun. And when you watch them, there's always the realtor who says, "Well, I know this was your limit, right? Like this was your limit, but I'm just going to show you this one house because it's got everything else." And of course, at the end, when they're making their decision, they're always like, "Well, it is the best school district and it is this." They just love the house. Like it's very emotional. And so you think about how people make decisions, it is based on emotion. And for some reason, we have disconnected that in so many ways from business. And we really need to help leaders feel like they have the right data and the right logic and they're not taking a risk, but then we're helping them with that emotional connection. And I think that storytelling is just a great way to do it. Another one of my favorite things is storyboarding. And that's something that you can do with executives, and it makes them super uncomfortable because you have to draw. But it's a great way to again connect with that customer experience in a totally different way. It uses a different part of our brain. There's all sorts of neuroscience to stories too.
Absolutely, Jeannie. Julia brings up a comment that I found kind of ties into what you're saying right now, but I found extremely interesting. She says, has anyone experienced how you purposely let something break, keep going badly so that it results in increased complaints, issues to force it being taken seriously?
Mm.
That sounds a little risky, a little costly, but a very interesting strategy. What's
Yeah,
your thought?
I've never seen that on purpose, but I have seen my caution to that would be sometimes we think our executives are going to get it. And the one that I remember is there was a really, bad stuff going on with customers. Their contact center was blowing up, so they turned off the phones. And they decided that their solution was turning off the phones and just forcing people to go through contacting online. And it was a terrible decision. But those are the types of panic-driven decisions that happen. And again, part of that is because they didn't have a real strategy. I think that we act like customer experience and customer service can just happen. But we need to define this. We need to define what success is. We need to make sure we're living up to those goals. We need to learn when we don't live up to those goals. And I think that the mistake that I've seen is that, I mean, going back to pick on our friends in sales again, that sales math is easier, right? Like sales math is you acquire a customer, that's revenue. So it's very easy to show that. We have harder math to show, and we have to be really honest about, hey, this is not working. We're going to try something else, do some pilots, do some A/B tests, whatever we can do. Because otherwise, what happens is they look around a few years and they go, well, what is this team doing for us? It's an expense, it's a cost center. And I can't imagine a world where somebody would say, the sales team didn't meet their goals this quarter. I guess it's not working. So let's get rid of our sales team.
Yeah,
That would never, ever happen because we all accept that sales is a part of business. Customer experience should be a part of business, but it's not defined that way. And as business people, we haven't been taught this way.
that's
So
right. It kind
we
of
have,
backs them into a corner. And I've actually seen some elements of what Julia is talking about. I don't know, Julia, if you want to put it in better context,
I
but
I was going to.
thank you.
So what I meant by that is when you're constantly saying to your leaders, to whoever needs to hear it, this is broken, it needs to be fixed. It is broken, it needs to be fixed. And then at some point, you just stop saying anything anymore because you're not getting anywhere.
Hmm.
So that's where you experience the piece about, okay, you know what? Let it just continue to be broken. And the day will come when the one complaint will get to the CEO, and then he will jump up and down and go to the complaints officer and say, what the hell is going on? And then you can turn around and say, well, I've been telling you all this time, but you weren't listening. So this is it now. Can we
Hmm.
get it fixed? Oh, yes. What do you need? Well, I need X amount of people. I need X amount of money, whatever it is. I need the software. So that's what I meant by letting it purposely break, not where the contact center would then be, inundated with calls and they switch off the phones. That would be, you know,
Yeah.
horrific to
Yeah.
even think about that. But yeah, to turn around and say, well, I've been telling you and you weren't listening. So there you go. Are you listening now?
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I think that's why a lot of times with these success statements, what happens is we have kind of the one macro one, and then we branch off and have a lot of success statements within the different teams. And so then you can bring, well, these are the goals that we have for the organization. This is how you can help me on this. If you don't want to help, okay, we're going to take that off our list because, we can't always influence our way to success. We need that buy-in across the organization. And that's why, I talk about CX as a mindset, strategy, and discipline. And the discipline part of it is really cross-functional support. It's really about, again, showing up like any other part of business and having people respect it as any other part of business.
Well, Jeannie, thank you so much. This was awesome. I always love to hear you speak, and glad you're willing to join us. So everybody, give a round
Thank
of
you so much.
virtual applause, jazz hands for Jeannie. So thank you so much. Now we're
Yeah.
moving into kind of the next
Thanks,
part
everybody.
of our
Bye.
session. Yeah, absolutely. We're moving into kind of the breakouts. And as we think about this, we've got several breakouts up and running. In fact, Kellen, I might have you come off mute and just quickly kind of announce the breakouts and let's let the folks leading them give us a wave and we'll catch them on the other side of that. So, Kellen, what do we got for breakouts?
Yeah, sounds good. So it looks like we have six different breakout rooms. Skip, Matt, Brad, JP, Jason, Dave, and Stacy are all running their own different rooms. Each one kind of has their own different stories. So if anybody wants to introduce part of what they're going to be discussing, and then I'll get those opened up.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the CX toolkit, the tools that you need to get executive buy-in and to make you the crew chief of CX transformation.
And I'm going to talk about the art of storytelling. So this is going to be a fun one.
Matt?
Stacy and I are joining forces again to talk about journey mapping from buy-in to action, building off Jeannie's wonderful discussion on buy-in, how we apply that to journey mapping.
I'm going to talk about culture, building on some of the things Jeannie talked about around emotion and how your culture leads to behaviors which get you the emotions you want on the journey.
And I'm going to talk about how to future-proof your professional CX career. How to take a personal assessment where you are, where you're going, and if you're winning and losing, and some strategies to sustain and become resilient in that career.